people like him, people like Bruce, they have such a life-enhancing connection with their fans. And I think that's the key to the long-term popularity that stars like David and Bruce and Elton and Rod Stewart actually have. And I think when a singer gets a song or songs with particular depth, they can go beyond entertaining, and going to see them in concert becomes an experience. And with that comes this huge sense that they must have of responsibility that comes with being so popular. Their music inspires, their songwriting touches the soul, and their very presence makes the world a better place.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Set Lusting Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. And have I told you lately I think I love you? Because today we are getting off the Bruce train and we're getting on a multicolored school bus and talking about one of my early musical crushes, David Cassidy. Joining me today is a writer and a podcaster who has a book about David Cassidy and his musical legacy. Louise Poynton, thank you for joining me. Good morning.
Yes. Good morning, Jesse. It is a thrill to be here and see you.
Yeah, so tell us a little about yourself.
Or me. Okay. I am a journalist and author, and, as you say, creator and host of the David Cassidy Connections podcast. I always wanted to be a journalist. There was never any doubt in my mind from about the age of 9. I wanted to be someone who could help other people, to be the voice for the little people who didn't have access to people in government, to their favourite sports stars, their celebrities. And I feel that as journalists we have a duty of responsibility within our communities to help people. And there were occasions in the almost 50 years that I've been a journalist that we have succeeded and we have helped people and we have helped to make the community better. And I think people still rely heavily on having a local newspaper in their hands. We've got we're swamped by social media these days, but I don't think anything replaces picking up a newspaper and actually reading at your leisure and absorbing the local news, especially from your local community in which you live. And as I say, being a journalist is something I always wanted to do. I think sometimes the music that we grow up with inspires us into our lives, into our careers, and into the people we eventually become. And I always wanted to work on music newspapers. Over here we had Melody Maker, New Musical Express, titles that many of your listeners are probably familiar with. And that's where I saw my career going. I thought I want to be a music journalist. During my training, my second love of sport started to take over, and I started covering Speedway.
Mm-hmm.
And I always wanted to be an Olympic athlete. That was my ultimate dream. I think we all have them when we're growing up. That never materialised. So they say if you can't do it, you write about it.
Okay.
So I wrote about sport, but I spent about 25 years as a news reporter, working my way up through the newsroom, chief reporter, assistant editor. And then after some 25 years of doing news, I got the golden opportunity to be a sports editor. And at that time, there were very few women who were holding that senior position in
Absolutely.
the newsroom. And I did that for another 21 years, mentoring and guiding young journalists on their path to success. And one of your most recent podcasts, you were talking about leadership roles.
Yes.
Mentoring people. I found that really interesting because your guest was explaining that once people get promotion, either within a sports club situation, a sports team, or in a professional capacity, sometimes they're overwhelmed by what they're being presented with. How do you manage a team? And I found that really interesting because from my experience, I had at one time for 14, 15 years, a team of sports writers who were all men.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I looked at it as though, well, I'm the best person to do the job. And that's not wanting to sound arrogant, but I'd been there, I'd done that. I knew
Yes.
what the job was all about, and I could guide them on their future careers.
You know, Louise, just recently, within 3 or 4 months ago, I had a very young agent, and what my gig is, I manage a contact center. And so someone who I really like a lot and is also a very gifted young agent. And she was talking to me and she says, the floor sometimes is not very happy because you're telling them what to do. And it's sometimes, it sounds like you're nagging at us and you don't even know how to do our job. And I said, well, I appreciate that. And I said, the reality is we're not doing a very good job. As a department, we've struggled and we're not doing very well. And I don't think people are doing their full potential. And the reality is I wasn't hired to find someone on the, we do roadside assistance. So I wasn't hired to get people things. I was hired to make this team better. And so I appreciate your feedback, but the reality is I don't need to know how to do that job. I just need to know how to do mine. And I do think there is some strength that you can look at your team and go, I know what it's like to be, up against a deadline, trying to write a story, about a match or some kind of event and trying to get it where it's good. And I know most writers, rewriting is the true gig, right? It is. I don't know if you've ever read, J. Michael Straczynski just put a book out about writing, and it was fascinating because he did one paragraph and he showed the editing process. He wrote the paragraph, he would write a paragraph and then he would go through underlining everything and then show you the final paragraph to show how much he processed. So yeah, I can imagine that was a unique gig trying to, manage. And also you have to worry about the egos. Yeah.
Yeah, completely.
And I also think, I've often said, I think that one of the hardest things to do as a manager is manage people with a different work ethic than yours. Mm-hmm. There are people that just don't care. I mean, they care, but they don't they're like, I did the best I could, versus the ones that go like I was when I was a support agent. Oh my goodness. Yesterday, our service level was in the toilet. That's horrible. What we got to improve today, even though that wasn't my job as an agent, I took it, a lot of responsibility. And I kind of going, I'm a huge Ted Lasso fan, right? I love that series. And, early in the series, Jamie, the star scorer, was like, he didn't care if the team won or lost because all he knows is his stats look good. He had played well versus a team.
Right.
If you were an Olympic athlete, what would you have been?
Middle distance runner.
Okay.
But what you're saying just now, and the same applies to athletes.
Yeah.
I don't believe anyone has a weakness. And what I always endeavoured to do as their manager, as their mentor, was find their strength. And then if they found their strength and something they were really good at within the scope of sports writing, then I was able to bring that strength to the fore, and the readers would read their work and they would know that that's been written by an expert, someone who knows exactly what they're talking about. And that might be some people are really excellent at doing interviews. Others have a greater strength to write match reports, do an in-depth analysis. And all of my team had different strengths and they all complemented each other. And it was wonderful to see the banter between them. Well, I'm stuck on an intro here. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
What's the story? Well, have you tried this? And they go, that's it. That's what I was looking for.
Yeah. What's your favorite sport to cover?
Well, I used to enjoy covering cricket and rugby. But my personal favourite sport to cover is motorsport. And I'm a huge fan of NASCAR, car racing in the States. And I do love American football because I appreciate the mindset of people like Tom Brady and what he brings to the table. And I know people will criticise him, but if you want to look for someone who's going to motivate a team, you look at him and his work ethic and the way that he encourages the team during play, you won't find a better ambassador.
It is amazing that he's 44 as we record this and is still I guess maybe not the top of his game, but it sure feels like it. It is, like he took a drink from the fountain of youth. I'm a Dallas Cowboy fan. In fact, later this morning, we're going to be talking, a bunch of my buddies will be doing a quick playoff preview podcast. But the fan of stories, the guy who loves reading, would be, let's have Tampa Bay and New England in the Super Bowl. Brady against Belichick. Just this, it is like a movie script. Yeah. So, because of that. Well, I always like to start at the beginning and talk to me about growing up and what kind of music did your family listen to? It obviously sounds like you guys were a fan of sports, but were you guys a fan of music?
Oh, very much so. My dad believed that Bobby Darin was the best male singer of his generation. And my mum was an Elvis fan, Frank Sinatra, but we always had music in the house. And I was brought up with all the big Hollywood musicals, South Pacific, Guys and Dolls, you name it. I was there singing in the rain, and I just loved that pure escapism into this world of entertainment. And music was always very, very important.
Big fan of Bobby Darin myself. My mom loved Bobby Darin, and just such a super entertainer that was taken much too young. Yeah. So very, very nice. So as you were a teenager, what kind of music were you enjoying, and what kind of, as you went into, high school, as we call it in the States, and university?
Yeah. Ricky Nelson.
Okay.
You know, there was a huge influence of American music on my life. I think the image that we had in the UK, that America is the land of opportunities, and all the biggest stars were coming out of the United States, influenced by the Beatles, obviously, and they in turn had been influenced by the blues,
Yes,
the likes of Chuck Berry, etc., in the States. But I just love the top 40. I love the charts, and I was so determined to be a music journalist that I could tell you when I was 12, 13, 14, the top 20, fair enough, you know, the song, the artist, but I could tell you the record label number as well. I was a bit of an anorak, and I knew everything about the top 20, and then, you know, from 20 to 40, I knew a little bit less, but I could roll those off for you. And I just loved happy music. Bubblegum pop was always important to me, but really the roots were rock and roll.
So when did you discover the Partridge Family? And David specifically?
Yeah. Well, I think at that age we all were. You're trying to find your own identity. You're trying to find a star that you can relate to, someone who belongs to you. And I was always rather resentful that you had to like one of the Monkees and you had to like one of the Beatles. Where were the solo artists of our generation? And we didn't get the Partridge Family here until 1971, so we were about a year behind you. But a few months after it had started in the States and was just being this huge phenomena, there was a picture of David Cassidy in one of our teen magazines, biography about him, and it was like I was done. I'd heard his voice, and then you saw his face, and for a young teenage girl at 13, as with millions around the world, that was it. Here he was. This was the voice we'd been waiting for. This was the star we'd been waiting for.
I can remember watching it, and in fact, I don't know if my memory, in which at 62 can be suspect, but I do know that I had gotten one of those cassette recorders, you know, that was rectangular, and you had to push the two buttons for the cassette tape. And I remember I taped an episode of the Partridge Family, right, just next to the TV, so I could listen to it again and again. So I always, I remember watching it and loving the show, loving the different characters. Shirley Jones was so, charismatic and sweet, and David was amazing. Had a slight crush on Susan Day because I'm a normal human male, and so it was, and the music was fun. It was the idea of, hey, let's get a band together and play, just really was a lot of fun.
Yeah. It was top-notch music.
Yes.
It's only with hindsight that you look back and you understand that the musicians were the Wrecking Crew, that on the earlier songs it wasn't David's actual voice where he was lip syncing to the vocal arrangements. Tom Baylor had been one of the first musicians on the Partridge Family to actually sing David's vocals in the initial stages. But of course he went on to write classics like She's Out of My Life by Michael Jackson. And in later years you think, well, that's a song that David should have recorded.
Yeah.
his voice matured.
Well, I do remember, and I was one of the, I don't think, I hope I wasn't alone, but I know I was in the very minority of a male buying, 16 and other, teen idol magazines, reading, Donny Osmond and David Cassidy and all these other, because I was like you, I loved pop music. I was a top 40 guy. I remember telling one of my one of my fellow students in high school that I don't listen to FM radio because I don't know any of the songs. You can't sing along. And I remember her going, "That's the point." It's, so but I remember reading that the show producers were like, "Oh, this kid, David, has a voice.
Yeah.
Like he's got some chops. He actually can sing." He was hired as an actor, and then they realized. I think it's interesting you mentioned the Monkees. Michael Nesmith just passed as we're recording this, and I was lucky enough to see him and Mickey Dolenz in concert here in Dallas just late last year. So it would be a couple of months before he died, and I was not surprised because he did not look in good health. He had a stool on stage. He walked in with a cane, but they told some wonderful stories about he came and said, "Hey, I've got a song I think that would be really good for us." And they said, "Well, it's not a monkey song." And he goes, "Well, I'm a monkey and I wrote it. How is it not a monkey song?" And they go, "Oh, go away, Michael." And so he ended up giving it to some young aspiring singer named Linda Ronstadt, and and did different drum. So that was, so I know David, it seemed like had a passion for music and acting. So what about the music spoke to you? What about that show spoke to you, Louise? And why has it been a passion for you for, now over 40 years?
Yeah, God, that's made me feel old.
Yes, I know that feeling.
Yeah. Well, I think it's because the Partridge Family was a wholesome family show.
Yes.
You've got a widowed mother and her 5 kids who sing songs, and they go on tour and they're successful, and she's basically doing this with them to put them through college.
Right.
But David was the standout singer. Once they realised, as you said just now, that he could sing, the whole world just sat up and noticed. And I think it was his emotional delivery of the lyrics to those songs. They were lovely little romantic songs, boy meets girl, boy loses girl, etc., etc. But it was a way in which, I suppose, as an actor, he was able to interpret those lyrics and deliver them in such a way that every young girl thought he was singing them to him.
Mm-hmm.
And I know over the years that image that we were all sold of the all-American boy who's good to his mother and he washes his hair every day, because he was the perfect image for a young girl. Sadly, I think that stayed with him all his life, and he could never shirk that image away. And people always saw Keith Partridge. They didn't always see the immense talent of someone who was, I would say, a tortured genius who was never allowed to really be himself.
But expand on that a little bit more.
Well, when he went out on the road and started to tour, his shows were more like a Chicago production. The musical arrangements were so different to what you were expecting. And he commanded the stage. And, okay, he's wearing nudie suits, as Elvis did, their skin-tight jumpsuits, or their sparkly overalls.
Right.
But what he was bringing to the stage was this rare explosion onto the music scene. And it was his platform to say, hey, there's more to me than I think I love you. And looking through the eyes of love, this is what I can do. And I think the arrangements and the production and his presentation on stage showed a man who wanted to be respected by other musicians, be recognised by the industry as, I'm not just a teenage idol.
Yeah.
I'm a serious musician. And the fact that a few years later, David Bowie wanted to work with him. Elton John wanted to record him. It'd be interesting to know if him and Bruce Springsteen, because they both hail from New Jersey, whether they had ever, if they would ever have been able to collaborate on something and what that might have achieved.
Yeah.
But, David's songwriting, he wrote songs with it'll come to me in a second.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I know that.
He wrote songs with Jerry Beckley from America. Right. He co-produced with Bruce Johnston of the Beach Boys.
Yes.
There was so much more to him that people either refused or couldn't look at. They just saw this cute, good-looking chap, and it was difficult for them to comprehend he's actually got some talent there. And that's why I think he was very tortured over it, because he could never be allowed to really come out and say, here I am.
Yeah, and I do think, the blessing and the curse of the Partridge Family, and it gets you worldwide recognition and opens up so many doors for you. But it is also, how do you break out of that? You're not Keith Partridge, you're David Cassidy, and the son of an amazing actor in his own right. His two stepbrothers both were very successful, so he came from a very powerful and talented family. But I do feel like I always cheered for him and was always happy when I saw him in a TV show like Police Story or David Cassidy Undercover, right? That where you wanted to see him. I always wanted to see him being successful. I always kind of rooted for him. And I never saw him perform live. Have no idea what kind of person he was in person. I'm sure he's flawed like all of us, but as a fan of his, I always wanted him to do well. Yeah. And I understand he was a lot more, in Europe, they tended to embrace his musicality more than the US pop stars did, right? Pop records.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little about that.
Well, I think it's only my take on it, but
yeah.
We didn't get the Partridge Family, as I say, until 1971, and it was only on here for 3 months, and then it was taken off. Now, when it was taken off, he suddenly appeared on a record tour in early 1972, and his hair was long, he was wearing furry boots, he had a long coat, and he was the quintessential rock star. There was nothing about Keith Partridge about him.
Mm-hmm.
Now, okay, the teenage magazines are full of all these pictures of him, which are wonderful to stick up on your bedroom wall and into scrapbooks. But you kind of felt there was more to him, and he was able to express himself more when he was outside of the United States. Okay, he's playing to massive audiences in the States. He sold out Madison Square Garden. But when he came over to the UK, to Europe and to Australia, he's playing sports venues to 70, 80, 90, 100,000 crowds. And we're seeing David Cassidy, rock star.
Yes.
We're not seeing Keith Partridge. There's no Partridge Family baggage with him. And most of his playlist was his covers of, Chicago, Beginnings, I'm a Man, drum solos, guitar solos.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, this is amazing. What's he doing? And I think he was allowed to be far more expressive as a rock musician than he was perhaps in the States, where people may have expected, I think I love you, I want to hear all the Partridge Family songs.
Yes.
Well, over here,
like I know the second time I saw Bruce live, it was a small little venue in a small venue, Verizon Theater, Grand Prairie, and it was just Bruce with his guitar and piano. It was one of his solo tours, and 3 or 4 people in front of me got up, and you could hear slightly inebriated, maybe really drunk. She's complaining to her date, why isn't he playing Born in the USA? And going. Were you able to ever see him perform live?
David?
Yes.
Yes, I saw him in 1973 at the Empire Pool, Wembley.
Yeah.
His White City concert in 74. But then I didn't go to another concert for 28 years.
Wow.
Although I was still a fan,
yeah,
still knew what was going on, still collected the memorabilia. Other things took over. My journalism career was so important to me, and you get married and you have kids, but he's always there. He was always there. And the strange thing was that when I did see him after this huge gap, as soon as he walked onto the stage, I burst into tears because suddenly I was 13, 14 years old again. It was just that single moment, by the time he'd finished his first or second song, I was fine.
Yeah.
It was good. It's like, oh, well, here he is now, and he's singing crooning ballads.
Yes.
But he's still singing, some Partridge Family songs and Cherish and Could It Be Forever. People like him, people like Bruce, they have such a life-enhancing connection with their fans. And I think that's the key to the long-term popularity that stars like David and Bruce and Elton and Rod Stewart actually have. And I think when a singer gets a song or songs with particular depth, they can go beyond entertaining, and going to see them in concert becomes an experience. And with that comes this huge sense that they must have of responsibility that comes with being so popular. Their music inspires, their songwriting touches the soul, and their very presence makes the world a better place.
Well said. Absolutely, I agree. So talk to me a little bit about the podcast and the book. How did you, obviously you've established you've been a journalist for, most of your adult life. So talk to me about why you decided to do a podcast, and tell us about the podcast, and then let's talk about the book.
Well, I'll turn it round the other way, because
okay,
the book is what came first, and
Okay.
that's an idea I had back in 2014.
Okay.
Excuse me a moment. It came to me in just a light bulb moment. We all have them. And I thought, there are so many wonderful stories of all us fans who have been to see David in concert. We've got perhaps a personal item of his. He helped so many through difficult times. I thought, wouldn't it be a good idea to have a look back through the memorabilia and find these interesting people and put it all together in a book? You can look on social media and you can see stories, and then you scroll through them and you never see them again. And I thought, well, if I can collect interviews with fans and track down people who perhaps shared a story 20, 30, 40 years ago, put them all into a book, and then we've got a historical record of what one man meant to so many people. I spent an awful lot of time researching, because I didn't start this in earnest for a further 2 years. I started to put it all together. I tracked down fans, and it was all coming together really well. These wonderful hundreds and hundreds of stories that were coming my way, and interviews I was doing with fans. And then David got ill. And then when he died at the end of 2017, the whole dynamics changed. And I was probably 90% finished by that point. And I stood back from it and I thought, I don't think I can do this. And everyone who had sent me stories originally said, you're still going to do this, aren't you? And there was such an overwhelming amount of love and respect that I thought, no, I'm going to have to do it, but I'm going to have to change it a little bit more. A lot of the fans said to me, and many of them been friends for decades, said, the story I sent you, I want to change it because I want to bring it up to date, because now I understand why he meant so much to me. And for many of them, it was an emotional journey, and they opened up to me in ways that they admitted they'd never even spoken to their family about, because they were sharing something so personal that in my position and as a fellow fan, I was able to relate to it and I could understand, and it mattered because he mattered.
Yeah.
And at the same time of doing this, I thought, well, this needs to be a tribute as well. It needs to be a celebration of his life. So I reached out to people such as Neil Sedaka, Richie Furay, who David worked with on his RCA albums, Ron Thal, who used to be with Guns N' Roses. And this may surprise people, he became a guitarist because of David Cassidy.
Nice.
And then I approached broadcasters around the world, people he'd worked with in the theatre, and they all wanted to pay tribute to him. And I reached out to fans again so that nobody would miss out on this opportunity. And in came all these beautiful poems and fans explaining why after he died they had a tattoo, because they wanted to feel close to him. They wanted to show people how much he meant. They shared with me their stories of their own addictions with such brutal honesty, of how they had addictions with alcohol or with food, and how this one man, who to many was a teenage idol and wasn't considered outside of the fan base anyone of any musical substance, how he changed their lives. He made them better people. He helped them overcome their addiction.
You know,
Powerful.
Yeah, that's very powerful. The name of the book, Cherish, David Cassidy, A Legacy of Love. It is available, online at Amazon and Barnes and Noble and every other venue. I will include a link to the book. As you were talking about this, I was thinking that often when I'm reaching out to get guests, they will say, "Oh, Jesse, I don't have anything interesting to say," and I always say that I believe every Bruce Springsteen fan has a story to tell, and it's my job or my calling to get as many of them on recorded as possible. But often when I'm going to there are Facebook pages and other venues where other podcasters will look to be on other people. We share guests, right? Like, oh, I'll be on your podcast, you be on my podcast. And I always talk about if you're passionate about a musician or a band, then come and join me. And Louise, I tell people a lot that I feel like we are not unique in having this huge Bruce Springsteen fan base and how much his music means to me. And I always say, but I'm sure if you got a Grateful Dead fan or a Led Zeppelin fan or, David Bowie fan, Frank Sinatra, going back and, Willie Nelson, that there are similar stories for every musician because music is important to our lives and music does, the quote, the soundtrack of our lives. So I can imagine the different stories you've heard, some funny, some inspiring, some sad, but often triumphant, correct?
Absolutely. When I was wading through all these stories, and there's 200 in the book, but I could have filled it twice over.
Yeah.
I was editing down submitted stories on occasions which would run to 10,000, 15,000 words.
Wow.
Just for one story. But they wanted to talk about him.
Sure.
This was their release. This was their therapy. And I feel very fortunate to have been in a position to be able to share their story. Now, obviously, those 10,000 stories didn't make the final cut.
Yeah.
They were edited down, to a few hundred words, maybe 500 words, because I wanted everybody to have the opportunity to share their story, to share their experience. The most interesting aspect of it all was the number of stories from male fans. They admit that they were too embarrassed when they were growing up at school to say, "Hey, I'm a David Cassidy fan. I love his music," because you're supposed to like Led Zeppelin. You're supposed to like the Rolling Stones. A teenage boy does not like David Cassidy music.
I was that guy, right? I
Yeah.
didn't. That's exactly what. No, it wouldn't have been. You can't say that you like David Cassidy or the Osmonds. God, the Osmonds. Talk about corny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what the male fans did tell me was that they wanted to be him. He was their role model.
Yes.
And because of him, they became songwriters, actors, singers, musicians. Again, that's a powerful influence that one man can bring to a generation. And the guys that I interviewed, they would sit there and they would get very emotional about it because for some, he was the male figure in their life that they didn't have.
Yeah.
And they wanted to be him because he opened up the possibility for them that anything is possible.
So because of these stories, I take it that's why you decided, I want to get some of these on recorded? Is that why you started doing some of the podcast?
It wasn't, strangely
Okay.
enough.
Okay,
No.
please tell me.
No, that wasn't the reason behind it.
Okay.
It was during the first lockdown here,
Okay.
and my husband had been listening to an interview with a NASCAR driver, and I said, "Oh, that sounds really interesting. What station is that on?" Because he does listen to international stations over the net.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "Oh, he said it's a podcast." And I thought, "Oh, a podcast? Okay." Nobody's doing one about David.
Right.
Talking to the fans. So the original idea was to give people a little bit of education about who he is. So they'd leave the conversation with a little bit more knowledge about who was David Cassidy.
Mm-hmm.
What did he do? I did go through my book and think, right, I can start with a couple of these fans because I know they've got some good stories, and that's what I did. But then I put some feelers out to reach people who were perhaps a little bit closer to him, whose stories I wasn't either able to get into the book or they weren't available to talk to me. So one of the first people I interviewed was Ralph Sinensky, who produced some of the early episodes of the Partridge Family, and also Brian Forster, who was the second Chris and the drummer. And the podcasts have now evolved into all my guests talking about their own life story, but also what the connection is to David. And that may be either through a fan or through a friend or through being a musician, or someone who never worked with him but is a musician and just wanted to show how much they respected him.
Yeah. It is amazing that, and I know it's a cliche, right? But the idea of, we all have this huge influence, whether we know it or not. And so I love that you're doing this. So it's the David Cassidy Connections.
Yes.
And it's available everywhere that you can find podcasts. Our mutual friend Sarah Hickman was on in October of last year sharing this, and that's how we connected. She said, "Oh, I had such a good time. You should talk to Louise, Jesse." What has surprised you about doing the podcast?
How much he meant to so many.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are so emotional. I interviewed an old school friend of his last week, John Provost, who was Timmy Martin in the Lassie television series.
Oh, okay.
They went to high school together, and he got very emotional about him. Felix Cavallari, who wrote How Can I Be Sure, he paid beautiful tribute to David about how he delivered his song and how good a musician he was, but he also highlighted on how underappreciated he was. And I think all these guests, and I've done more than 40 now, they're central to David's historical musical legacy, because it's important we capture these conversations much the same way as the memories and tributes in Cherish are important. Locating and interviewing all these guests, as they say, they range from fans, friends, actors, musicians who worked with him. And they all want him to be remembered for what he gave beyond the teenage idol image.
Yeah.
And the podcast is a place to remember him, but also for other people to learn and further the reach of explaining to people just how good he was and what they had been missing. And take a listen to his solo albums. Take a listen to The Higher They Climb, Home Is Where the Heart Is, Getting It in the Street, where Mick Ronson played lead guitar.
Yeah.
Have a listen, absorb it, and you'll begin to understand and appreciate that there was far more to him than the image everybody was sold.
Yeah. He's more than just the guy's face on a lunchbox. And absolutely.
Yeah.
What's next for you, Louise? What are your future plans?
I'm trying to complete a 100-mile sportive cycling event.
Oh, wow.
Yes. I've done a few, but I've only kind of made about 85, 90 miles.
Okay.
I either had cramp set in, or there was one that I was doing. We were nearly at the finish, and they closed the course because of a nasty accident. But my plan is, when the weather improves, to get more training outside, and this summer complete my first 100.
Well done. That's a good goal. That's exciting. Any final thoughts before we move to the Mary question?
There's many parallels, between David Cassidy and Bruce Springsteen. And I don't think many people probably be aware. They both grew up in New Jersey. They both decided to pick up a guitar after seeing the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show. And I think maybe both of them were in pursuit of something that was missing from their younger life. They both had difficult relationships with their fathers. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if, like all of us, they have gone back to try and make sense of things and find an acceptance. They were wrestling with their inner demons. How do you cope when you are so popular, when you are so loved, when you are so well known across the world? And those formative years, they build our identities. And I think we owe a huge debt of gratitude to people like David and Bruce for helping us to become the people we are today.
Well said. Well said. All right, Louise, before I let you go, first off, thank you so much for being here and talking about the book and the podcast and your David Cassidy's legacy. I end every episode with the Mary question, and if you have not listened to Set Listing Bruce before, because you're a big fan of Louise and that you're checking it out, Jay Armstrong is an honors English teacher, recently retired from the Philadelphia area, and he teaches at the time honors English. And he spent 2 days, his seniors, and they would break apart the Bruce Springsteen song Thunder Road, looking at all the lyrics, talk about the imagery Bruce does, talking about the themes of the poem. And then at the end, he asked the question, does Mary get in the car? So Louise, that's your question. Does Mary get in the car at the end of Thunder Road?
I'm just going through the lyrics here in my head. I'm playing it back. No.
Okay. No, that's as I share, it's about 60-40 split. 60% say yes, but about 40% say no. They say that Mary is too afraid, or he didn't convince her, so yeah. Do you want any thoughts on why you said no?
Well, it's as you said, I think it was convincing enough.
Good.
But now you said all that, I'm going to go and play it, and I'm going to listen again.
Well, if you change your mind, call me. You just say, hey, Jesse, I want to record that again. And that would be fine. All right. David Cassidy Connections is the podcast. Her book, Cherish, is available everywhere books are available. I am looking forward to reading it. It has been Cherish, David Cassidy. I have been, it is on my to read list, and I'm looking forward to it. Louise, thank you so much for joining. Have a great weekend, and I hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you, Jesse. I've enjoyed it.
Very nice.
To meet you.
Listeners, go check out the book. Remember, go get vaccinated. Let's all be good to each other, because that's how we're going to get through this. And we'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.